Hey everyone, with the Media Tour embargo being lifted a few days ago, let's dive deeper into the changes made to Black Mage and discuss changes to openers, single target, and AOE rotations. Before I start, you should know that this video might have a negative tone in some parts. If you follow me on social media, you'll already know I'm not a huge fan of some of the Black Mage changes. And if you're not ready to hear criticism of a job before it's released, then you should probably just stop watching now. Of course, as with all media tours, everything is subject to change. This means potency, numbers, as well as even skill effects themselves. A great example of this is the Endwalker Media Tour. What was the difference between Media Tour Black Mage and Endwalker Black Mage? In the release build for Endwalker, we saw Paradox and Umbrel Ice switch to an instant cast from a hard cast. We also got 2 charges of triple cast instead of just 1, and the Thunder proc was extended to 40 seconds. Not to mention ley lines being moved from 90 seconds to 2 minutes. So first, let's talk about changes to existing abilities first. High Blizzard 2 and High Fire 2 have been lowered from 140 potency to 100. As well, the enhanced flare mechanic on High Fire 2 has also been removed. As a result, flare has now moved from 220 potency base and 280 enhanced to simply 240 base at all times. Blizzard 3 and Fire 3 have had their potencies upgraded from 260 to 280. Next up, the Aspect Mastery traits have been updated to explicitly say the damage bonuses and penalties of casting your elemental spells in the opposite stances. This is great for clarity as these were never actually visible in the game. You actually had to go to a wiki to find this information. They also now touch on how the new MP regeneration system works for Black Mage. You get 2,500 MP for casting Ice spells in Umbrel Ice 1, 5,000 MP for casting Ice spells in Umbrel Ice 2, and 10,000 MP for casting Ice spells in Umbrel Ice 3. As a result, Umbral Soul has had its tooltip reworded to explicitly say that it gives mana on usage. However, it's still provided at level 76. Paradox has also been changed. It can now only be cast in Astral Fire and is always instant cast. It will always generate a Fire 3 proc with 100% guarantee. This is a big one, and not being able to cast it in Umbrel Ice anymore is a pretty huge change. We'll discuss this more in a bit later in the video. Sharpcast and the Thundercloud system has been completely removed from the game. At level 92, Thunder 3 and Thunder 4 get upgraded to High Thunder and High Thunder 2 respectively. These are the Thunder spells that we saw in the trailer. The potencies look a little off. For example, High Thunder does 200 on hit with a 50 potency dot for 30 seconds, so 700 potency total. Currently in Endwalker, a Thunder 3 proc does 750 total in the same scenario, so these numbers are probably going to get changed. You require the Thunderhead buff in order to cast High Thunder or High Thunder 2, as well as the previous versions of Thunder before the level upgrade. This is a new system. The Thunderhead system works as follows. Number 1, you get the Thunderhead buff entering Astral Fire or Umbrel Ice from a neutral state, like in your opener. Number 2, you'll get Thunderhead whenever you switch between Astral Fire and Umbrel Ice. And number 3, you'll get Thunderhead whenever you use Mana Font. Speaking of Mana Font has been reworked this expansion. Instead of granting 3000 MP, it now acts as a full MP restore, plus giving you 3 Umbral Hearts, refreshes the duration of Astral Fire, gives you Paradox, as well as the Thunderhead buff. This means that in our opener and every 2 minutes thereafter, we will be casting even more fire spells. Next, let's talk about the new traits and abilities. As mentioned before, at level 92, Thunder Mastery 3 will upgrade your Thunder 3 and Thunder 4 to High Thunder and High Thunder 2. At level 94, you will get Enhanced Swift Cast, which will reduce the cooldown of Swift Cast to 40 seconds. At level 96, it's 2 traits. The first is Enhanced Ley Lines, which enables your ley lines to be moved once per cast through the new action learned at the same level, Retrace. You also get Enhanced Enochian 4, which buffs Eno's damage multiplier to 30% from the previous multiplier of 23%. At level 98, Enhanced Addle increases its duration to 15 seconds. This also mimics the Enhanced Reprisal and Feints received by tanks and melee DPS at the same level. You will also receive Enhanced Polyglot 2, which allows the stacking of a 3rd polyglot. Finally, at level 100, we have Enhanced Astral Fire. This grants a stack of Astral Soul when landing Fire 4 or Flare. This is the new job gauge that's added at level 100 named the Astral Gauge. Landing Fire 4 gives 1 stack, and although the English tooltip is unclear, Landing Flare gives 3 stacks of Astral Soul as seen in the job action trailer and gameplay footage. Upon getting 6 stacks of Astral Soul, you can cast the level 100 ability Flare Star. Flare Star does 350 potency of damage in an AoE with 60% fall off and has the same cast time as Despair, as well it costs no MP. Note that this does not refresh the Astral Fire timer, and you do require 6 Astral Soul stacks in order to cast it. You cannot cast it with less than 6 stacks like Apex Arrow. So now let's do a deeper dive into the changes. Overall, several of the changes effectively puts what we know as non-standard Black Mage in a tough spot. In fact, it's likely not very possible at all. Why is this the case? There are several reasons, but it comes down to mainly a few. First of all, Paradox and Umbralice is removed. Only ice spells can generate significant mana, which forces casts of Blizzard 4. The Astral Gauge cannot be carried over between fire phases, and only Fire 4 and Flare can generate Astral Souls, not Despair, Fire 3 proc, etc. Firstly, Paradox being removed from Umbralice is a pretty controversial design direction, and I'm not a huge fan of this change. You can even look on both the English and Japanese forums and see a lot of complaints about this. Try and find someone who even asked for Umbralice Paradox to be removed, and I think you'll be searching for quite a while. Thematically, being able to cast it in ice and fire makes sense, as visually it makes use of both ice and fire, hence it being called Paradox. I imagine as compensation they made it instant in Astral Fire, but this can make your fire timer harder to manage due to how it refreshes. However, to alleviate this worry, they did make Fire 3 proc a 100% generation rate. This means that there will be some decision making done whether you use this Fire 3 proc in Astral Fire 3, or for movement, or an Enochian refresh, or do you save it to use it in a transpose line for more damage? With the Fire 3 proc, you will basically always want to do a transpose Fire 3 proc in a standard line, as this will result in the most DPS. It would look something like this. Cast Blizzard 3, then Blizzard 4, use some sort of instant cast like a High Thunder or Xenoglossy, and then weave Transpose. Use your Fire 3 proc, and then do 3 Fire 4s, Paradox, 3 Fire 4s, Despair, and then Flare Star. We know that since Blizzard 3 would take you to Umbralice 3, the Blizzard 4 would fully restore your mana by granting 10,000 MP. And since Umbralice Paradox is gone, you have to use another instant to weave Transpose. This would either be High Thunder or Xenoglossy. Alternatively, you could Swift cast your Blizzard 4 after a fast cast Blizzard 3. There are a few options available. Anyways, I'm not entirely sure why they thought Paradox, one of the most well-received skills in Endwalker, had to get removed from Umbralice. The skill is super satisfying to use and just removes damage and movement options. I'm wondering if their thought process was that since you can cast Blizzard 3 and Blizzard 4 and have full mana now, you don't need the skill anymore, which I personally hate this logic. The skill is powerful, and removing it from the rotation and adding Flare Star to the mix isn't exactly the huge buff that some people seem to think it is. So essentially, the single target rotation for Black Mage and Dawntrail would look something like this, with no Paradox. So you have Blizzard 3, Blizzard 4, Fire 3 to switch to Astral Fire, and then you have your 3 Fire 4s Paradox, 3 Fire 4s Despair, and then following with Flare Star. As a side note, I'm sure we will see quite a few people dropping Enochian in the first bit of Dawntrail, since we're all so used to having Paradox that we'll accidentally cast Fire 1 in Umbralice and lose it all. With Paradox being instant cast in Astral Fire, it will be advantageous to do 4 Fire 4s first before doing Paradox, by front-loading your Fire phase. This makes the latter half of your Astral Fire phase more forgiving in the event that you want to use a High Thunder or Xenoglossy for movement or buff alignment. Again, as mentioned in my job action trailer breakdown video, if you have instant cast Fire Paradox, you cannot cast 4 Fire 4s in a row and then Despair unless you have a GCD faster than 2.24, or use Swift Cast, Triple Cast, Ley Lines, or have a refresh in between with the Fire 3 proc. This effectively means that you have to use a Fire 3 proc in this scenario for maintaining Astral Fire, which again would not be as much of a gain as it is holding it for a transpose line. Let's talk about High Thunder for a moment. It's the media tour, so numbers can change, but it seems weird to me that in Endwalker we have the Thunder proc doing 400 damage on hit and 350 dot potency for 750 total, whereas High Thunder is only 700 total, with 200 coming from the on-hit application and 500 coming from the dot. By being so heavily focused on the dot element, it makes clipping the dot more punishing. What do I mean by this? Clipping the dot means casting the dot while you still have duration left over, and this would be when you use the dot as a form of emergency movement. You are less punished for this in Endwalker because the on-hit potency of the dot is much higher. The other very annoying thing about not having sharp cast anymore is that in fights where you want to dot two targets that are separated, you cannot do it back to back anymore, and it requires a transition between Umbral Ice and Astral Fire in between dot applications. Let's look at DSR Ice phase as an example. In Endwalker, you would cast Sharp Cast during the downtime and presumably have a Thunder proc ready from the Nidhogg phase. Then you could dot one eye and then dot the other eye right away for maximum damage. Going into Dawntrail, if I were to try and double dot the eyes, I'd have to use my Thunder proc on one eye, which consumes my Thunderhead buff. Then I have to use Fire 3 to transition to Astral Fire, and then dot my other target with the new Thunderhead buff that I've acquired. Essentially, it already takes up 1 GCD of space in my Astral Fire phase, which would again likely require me to use my Fire 3 proc in Astral Fire to maintain Enochian, which then means I can't do the Astral Fire 1, FRP optimization, etc. It also means that if your dot refresh timing happens in the middle of your fire phase, you are physically unable to dot both targets again in your fire phase as you only have one charge of Thunderhead, so you will lose damage by not having your dot running on the other target. This is something you can currently do in Endwalker. I feel like the only reason they made this change at all with Thunderhead is because there was a noob trap that people were doing that involved using Thunder procs immediately after getting them instead of waiting for the dot to fall off. But I don't think removing the whole Sharpcast and Thunder proc system was the answer to this. In fact, I feel like some people will still see a proc light up and cast Thunderhead immediately, even though it's not optimal to do so. Next, as for my thoughts on all of these changes, it really seems that they're trying to shoehorn Black Mage into playing this very specific playstyle of casting 6 Fire 4s every fire phase. This is apparent when Flare Star is only gained when capping the gauge, and only Fire 4 fills the gauge in single target. Also, you cannot carry Astral Gauge once you swap elements, so you can't do short fire lines without losing a usage of Flare Star. I hate this because one of the things I liked most about Black Mage and Endwalker was that the possibilities were nearly endless. There were a lot of creative things you could do. In my opinion, the job is not very flexible anymore. Let's say that the boss is going to disappear in 10 seconds and you are just entering Ice Phase with Blizzard 3. It's Endwalker. What do you do next? Probably after your Blizzard 3, you use Paradox, Fire 3, and get as many Fire 4s off as you can before he disappears. You could skip Blizzard 4 in Endwalker since it's a weak spell, and you didn't need the hearts since the boss was going to disappear anyways. Okay, now it's Dawntrail, and you're in the same situation. You cast Blizzard 3, and you have to cast Blizzard 4 because you need it to get mana. Then you cast Fire 3, and then some Fire 4s off. It's a worse of a situation than before, again because you don't have Paradox for the damage, and you get no mana from Paradox even if it did exist. Then you have to think of fights with down for the count like elements that prevent you from casting Umbral Soul. Think P8S Ego Death, for example, where the downtime is just over 15 seconds, just long enough to lose Enochian. To maximize your damage output in Endwalker, you would want to end that phase with a Despair and quickly transpose to Ice so that you would gain mana during the cutscene, and you could start your rotation again from max mana during the Phoenix double damage phase, usually either by using a Fire proc or swifting a Fire 3. But now in Dawntrail you would have to sacrifice damage because you are forced to use a Blizzard 3 and Blizzard 4 as your last GCDs before the cutscene, because if you ended on Despaired and Transposed, you are not gaining any mana beyond the passive 200 MP every 3 seconds that every job gets. This is only enough to swift cast a Blizzard 3, again forcing you into a specific reopener. I'm also imagining things like the end of Phase 5 on top, where in some groups you may need to push your damage very hard to meet the 20% DPS check. Even though you can Despair and Transpose and gain little bits of mana before the downtime cutscene with passive MP regeneration, it still locks you into an Ice Reopener in Phase 6, which removes player options. The Umbral Ice Paradox change, in my opinion, I think is universally disliked. Paradox was such a cool spell, having different uses in Astral Fire and Umbral Ice. This change is even getting a lot of flack on the official Square Enix JP forums as well, so I'm wondering if it's going to make it through the release build or if it will change at some point in the opening patches, like how they added back Scholar's Energy Drain or Samurai's Hagakure. It seems so unnecessary that they removed it. What's the harm in keeping this ability? It really did feel like they thought the player base would not need Paradox anymore since Blizzard 4 would give max mana in a standard rotation. This spell was really nice to cast and high damage, and the utility on it being an instant cast, being able to weave and move was great. Also, on the side, let me say that I am fine with them removing the mana tick system. I was already ready for this to happen, and I even predicted something like this would happen in my last video. I think it's just stupid that beyond this, they made several other changes to effectively neuter any sort of rotation that is not the bread and butter 6 Fire 4s in your fire phase. It's a loss of flexibility to adapt to different conditions of a fight. I think a lot of people are misinformed about MP server ticks. You did not need third-party mana tick plugins or trackers to do basic non-standard lines. In fact, many of them were guaranteed to work, no matter what. Like, for example, using Despair into Xenoglossy, weaving Transpose, then using Umbralized Paradox, a Thunder proc, then Xenoglossy, then transposing to Astral Fire 1, using a Fire 3 proc, and then 3 Fire 4s and a Despair. This always worked. It didn't matter if you were a spell speed build or a crit build, it would just work. You didn't need a tracker. The only purpose of a tracker was to build extremely scripted rotations or make very specific openers work consistently 100% of the time, that basically only a few people like speedrunners even bothered doing. Next, Flare Star. While I thought it looked kinda cool, it is very underwhelming looking at it now. I know the potencies are not final in the Mediator build, but I'm curious why even the Mediator build has it at 350. For a level 100 ultimate capstone, I was thinking that it would have a lot more impact. It doesn't feel as snappy as Despair, and honestly, since its potency is not that much greater than Despair, it doesn't feel as bad if you were to lose it somehow. For a level 100 spell, it feels like it should be just as strong or stronger than Xenoglossy. I'm also wondering about if it had slightly lower base potency but gained more potency per stack of Astral Soul that you had, which will let you cast it at lower stacks. This could potentially let you use it even if you screwed up in your fire phase, or allow it to be used in short fire lines potentially. Of course, there are a few options here. Mana Font, although really nice that it got a much needed upgrade, still has issues in that it is extremely easy to drift. The intended usage of Mana Font is after a fire phase where you've used up all of your mana. So if you are in the middle of your fire phase, for example, and Mana Font is off cooldown, you'll have to wait around 10 to 15 seconds before you can even think about pressing it. These little bits of time add up and it can result in losing a Mana Font in the fight. I mentioned it in my previous video, but I think if Mana Font had a cooldown reduction to 110 or even 100 seconds, then it could maybe help this part of Black Mage out. In Endwalker, since we weren't locked to only doing the standard rotation, we could use different combinations of shorter fire lines in order to make it Mana Font come up at a favorable time, like right after a Despair, and we didn't have to burn excess resources or drift Mana Font significantly. But in Dawntrail, since you are basically forced to do the standard rotation and nothing else, it will be a lot harder to keep Mana Font off cooldown. Essentially, Square Enix's options here are to lower the cooldown, or add an XCOG effect so that you can pop Mana Font early and it will trigger once you reach 0 mana. But even that XCOG effect can be a detriment in some situations where you want to burn Xenos in Astral Fire for raid buffs after a Despair and Flare Star, and then use the Mana Font as your Astral Fire refresher. Lastly, of course, as I predicted, they seem to have looked over the leveling experience for Black Mage yet again. By removing the large mana ticks, you get an Umbralized 1, 2, and 3, and not moving Umbral Soul to a lower level, I am struggling to see how this is supposed to help new players or players running Black Mage in lower level content like dungeons or old ultimates. For example, Black Mage was already bad enough in UCOB and Ultima Weapon Ultimate, but now not being able to generate mana in the downtime means you are quite literally forced into casting Blizzard 3 and Blizzard 4 before every trio, which lowers your damage even more. It's honestly insane to me that they did not lower the acquisition level of Umbral Soul, and I think this is one thing they really need to do to help the job in its lower level range. Okay, now that we've got part of the rant over with, let's discuss some optimization. In the live letter, Yoshi P said that we should look out for new things to optimize. We of course took him up on this challenge. So what kind of optimizations can a Black Mage do in this current Mediator build in order to do more damage? Of course, there's the Astral Fire 1, Fire 3 proc standard line we can do. As mentioned previously, this takes a Fire 3 proc that you previously generated and uses it in Astral Fire 1 to act as your transition spell, bringing you to Astral Fire 3. Let's quickly recap why this is a gain. In Scenario 1, you will use the Fire 3 proc in Astral Fire 3. Then, you will enter your next Fire phase with a Fire 3 cast from Umbralize 3. The Fire 3 proc is 280 potency times the 1.8 damage multiplier, giving 504 potency. Then, the Fire 3 from Umbralize 3 is 280 potency times the 0.7 multiplier, giving 196 potency. This is a total of 700 potency in 2 GCDs, or 5 seconds, for 140 potency per second. In Scenario 2, you use the Fire 3 proc in Astral Fire 1 as your transition spell. The Fire 3 proc is 280 potency times the 1.4 damage multiplier, giving 392 potency in 1 GCD, or 2.5 seconds, for 156.8 potency per second. Essentially, cutting out the weak Fire 3 from Ice for a stronger Fire 3 from Astral Fire 1 is better than using a strong Fire 3 from Astral Fire 3, and then a weak Fire 3 from Umbralize 3. The second crazy wacky optimization you can do is instant casting Blizzard 3 from Umbralize. Again, this has to do with the damage penalties when casting spells from the opposite element. For example, a Blizzard 3 cast from Astral Fire 3 is 196 potency since it's 280 base and the 0.7x multiplier. But if you cast Blizzard 3 from Umbralize, it's always going to be 280 potency. So if you were in a situation where, for example, you use Despair, then Flare Star, then Xenoglossy, Transpose, Swift Cast, Blizzard 3, Blizzard 4, now you have max mana, and your Blizzard 3 is actually stronger than if you had just cast it from Fire. You do have to use a Swift Cast or Triple Cast charge on this, but this is definitely a damage gain. Of course, you do have to consider the trade-off that you could use the Swift Cast or Triple Cast on Fire 4s or Despair or Flare Star, as those will actually gain you time, since those reduce the recast to 2.5 seconds from their longer cast times of 2.8 and 3 seconds. However, as always with these usages, it is definitely fight dependent and depends if these time savings will result in an extra cast being sent. In general though, the most optimal uses of Triple Cast in the Mediator build will be on Despair, Flare Star, and then a transposed Umbralize Blizzard 3. As for other optimizations, there isn't really much more to mention. You can do some shortened lines, but they would be mainly used for alignment if anything else. They are not as good potency per second wise as doing standard with a Fire 3 proc, but if there is nothing else available, it might be an option depending on the fight. And before anyone asks, casting a Flare just to get 3 Astral Souls and then casting Flare Star in single target is not good. For example, using the previous Blizzard 4 Transpose line as an example, we could use a Transpose after a Despair and Flare Star, use Lucid Dreaming, hardcast a Blizzard 4, use High Thunder, Transpose to Fire 3 proc, and then using 3 Fire 4s, then Flare Star. This would be lower potency per second because Flare Star itself is only slightly more than Despair, so we're trading a lower potency spell, which is Flare, to cast one that is only slightly higher than Despair, and we're using an extra GCD to do it. This is not worth. The only potential application I could see is if you have exactly 2 GCDs before the boss is dying, and you only have 800 mana, and you somehow had 3 Astral Souls already, then and only then would I even consider using Flare into Flare Star, but realistically, I'd try and find a way to not get into that situation again. Of course, with the tooltips and gameplay knowledge we have, we can begin to craft some openers that we will use in endgame content like Savage Raids. With Flare Star requiring 6 Fire 4s or 2 Flares to cast, the immediate thought that some people have is doing a Blizzard Start opener, so you can cast Flare Star in your first Fire phase. This could work, but based on some math and using current potencies, you'll be better served by doing a Fire opener. You will not have to pre-pull Sharpcast anymore, nor clip Triple Cast, since High Thunder is an instant cast. So you'll pre-pull Fire 3 at around 4 seconds left on the countdown, and then immediately High Thunder. From this High Thunder, you can weave Swift Cast and Amplifier, and after the instant Fire 4, you can use your Tincture. After hardcasting the second Fire 4, use Xenoglossy and weave Triple Cast and Ley Lines. Then use your Triple Cast charges on 2 Fire 4s and a Despair weaving Mana Font. Use 2 more Fire 4s. At this point, you will have filled up the Astral Gauge and can cast Flare Star. You can cast a Fire 4 and High Thunder 2 before using Paradox and finishing your Fire phase out. This opener aims to maximize damage into raid buffs, which are now universally 20 seconds long. The first spell in raid buffs would ideally be the hard-casted Fire 4 after the potion, and the last spell in raid buffs would be the High Thunder cast. Of course, all fights are different and may require different openers and alignment, for example, using ley lines pre-pull. So we've talked a lot about single target since that's usually what is most relevant for people who do raids and extreme trials. However, the Black Mage AOE rotation has also changed quite a bit. In Endwalker, you would want to enter with High Blizzard 2, then freeze to get hearts. Use one High Fire 2 to swap to Fire, and then use 2 more High Fire 2s to use 2 of your 3 Umbral Hearts, and then 2 Flares to consume those hearts. These flares would also be buffed by the enhanced flare mechanic, making them 280 potency and stronger than the unenhanced version. Looking at Dawntrail, the AoE rotation cuts out 2 of these High Fire 2s. This is because the enhanced flare mechanic is completely removed and its potency even got lowered. It's basically just a transition spell now, so the standard Black Mage AoE rotation in Dawntrail is looking like it will just be High Blizzard 2, into Freeze, into High Fire 2, and then 2 Flares, and then Flare Star. Of course, you will want to insert High Thunder 2 in here whenever you need to put it on the enemy again, and Fouls when you need to burn Polyglots. You will get guaranteed High Thunder 2 procs here just by doing the rotation due to Thunderhead, so you can really just use it wherever. Not counting High Thunder 2 or Foul, this rotation has a potency per second of 198.69 right now based on Mediator potencies if there are 3 enemies. But wait, it turns out that this is not the best thing that you can do in AoE. Actually, because High Blizzard 2 and High Fire 2 are laughably low potency, it is actually a gain to not even cast them at all with current potencies. You can do something like this: transpose to Umbralice 1, cast Freeze, then use some filler like High Thunder 2 or Foul, transpose to Astral Flyer 1, and then cast 2 Flares and then Flare Star. This has a potency per second of 224.2, which is a whopping 12.8% better than the standard AoE rotation. The 2500 MP from Freeze is guaranteed due to the new MP regeneration system, and it is just enough MP to cast 2 Flares using the Umbral Heart MP reduction. You'll just need to weave transpose using fillers like High Thunder 2 or Foul. Heck, even if you clip one of these transposes, it will still be a gain. I swear I made similar comments back in my Endwalker Mediator video nearly 3 years ago, but it's so weird that these upgraded AoE spells are so underwhelming. I am expecting a potency buff for sure since these numbers are kinda whack and definitely seems unintended. In summary, as you may have guessed, I am not a huge fan of the changes they made to Black Mage. The few things I'd like to see implemented are: number 1, Umbralice Paradox is added back to the game. Number 2, Despair now grants Flare Star stacks, at least 2 of them. Number 3, Flare Star and High Thunder potencies are increased, and this is likely to happen anyway since Mediator stuff is never really final. Number 4, and this one's kind of a long shot, any GCD cast in Ice will generate mana, not just Ice spells. And number 5, some sort of cooldown reduction for mana font, even by 10 seconds to help alleviate mana font drift. I don't think I'm alone in saying that these changes hurt a lot of high-end Black Mage optimization. I've heard that a lot of the changes have been disliked overseas in Japanese and Chinese communities as well, so I'm hoping that some of this feedback makes its way up the chain. And for my fellow raiders and content creators who seem to enjoy bashing Black Mage players who are frustrated and seemingly reveling in the loss of complexity that the job had, we are just frustrated that the job is less flexible than ever before. If you feel the need to be happy that Black Mage is losing options because that's what's happening to everyone else, then I hope you can find your happiness elsewhere. I really enjoy playing Black Mage, and I will continue to play it in Dawntrail and make guides for the job, but if this is all that we have to work with, a lot of the fun factor for me personally has been removed. The overall trend in most jobs has been simplification, and Black Mage, one of the last bastions of optimization, seemed to have been the one in sights for Square Enix this expansion. I think it definitely shows that the type of gameplay we had in Endwalker with Nonstandard is not going to be acceptable on any job in the future, and we're kind of forced to play the job the way Square Enix sets out for us. It's disappointing to say the least. Thanks for watching.